That night I was 16, asleep in her bed while a fever raged. When I woke, the slap came before the scolding. She called me an intruder, and Dad just said, "That room was never yours." 16 years later, I opened the glass boardroom door of Northbridge Meridian with a smile. They thought I was there to take minutes. I was there to close a door, right in their faces. My name is Rhea Vale. Even now, at 32, with the skyline of Grayford sprawling beneath my office window, certain sounds can transport me back. Not the grand, dramatic noises, but the small, sharp ones. The click of a magnetic lock, the slide of a heavy file into a cabinet, or, most potently, the cold, metallic clatter of bracelets against a wooden surface. That sound takes me back 16 years, to a night when the world shrank to the size of a single room in a house in Norcrest that was supposed to be my home. The fever had taken hold in the late afternoon, a slow, creeping tide of heat that left my limbs feeling like lead and my thoughts like molasses. My own small room, tucked away at the back of the house, felt airless, suffocating. I needed cool sheets, a different space, a place to escape the oppressive heat radiating from my own skin. The guest room, her room, the one she decorated with a fierce, impersonal taste after she married my father, was at the front of the house, where the evening breeze sometimes stirred the curtains. It was empty. It was always empty. A showroom of beige linens and polished cherry wood, waiting for guests who never arrived. Shivering despite the heat consuming me, I'd stumbled down the hallway, a ghost in my own home. The bed was large and crisp, the duvet a weightless cloud. I didn't bother with the lights. I just peeled back the cover, slid between the cool, sterile sheets, and fell into a fever-addled sleep. The dreams were fractured and strange, filled with echoing voices and the scent of something astringent, like lemons and ammonia. The awakening was violent. It wasn't a sound, but a light. The brutal, overhead glare that strips away all shadows and softness. I blinked, my pupils shrinking to pinpricks. A figure stood over the bed, Eleanor, my stepmother. Her face was a mask of cold fury, her lips a thin, bloodless line. Before my sleep-fogged brain could form a question, her hand shot out and gripped the edge of the duvet. With a single vicious tug, she ripped it away, exposing me to the chilled air of the room. My thin pajama shirt offered no protection. "What do you think you're doing?" Her voice was low, but it vibrated with a rage that was far more terrifying than a shout. As she moved, her collection of heavy silver bracelets, the ones she wore as armor, a signal of her status and wealth, clacked hard against the cherry wood nightstand. Clack, clack, clack. The sound was like stones hitting a coffin. Sharp, final. I tried to sit up, to explain. I have a fever. My room was so hot. The words died in my throat. Her hand was already moving. The slap wasn't born of heated passion. It was executed with the detached precision of a corporate decision. It was a correction, a realignment of the established order. The impact was a flat, dry sound that seemed to suck all the air out of the room. My head snapped to the side, and a constellation of bright, painful stars exploded behind my eyes. The sting was immediate, a wildfire spreading across my cheek. And then I saw him, my father, Arthur Vale. He wasn't in the room, but standing just outside, framed in the doorway, a silhouette against the dim light of the hall. He was a spectator. He had seen the light go on, heard her voice, and had come to watch. But his eyes, they weren't on me. They weren't on her, either. They were fixed on a point on the far wall, a bland, generic landscape painting she had chosen. He was studying it with an intensity that suggested it held the secrets of the universe, anything to avoid looking at the scene unfolding 3 feet in front of him. "Arthur," Eleanor said, her voice still tight, never taking her eyes off me. "Tell her." He cleared his throat. The sound was small, weak. When he finally spoke, his voice was hollow, stripped of all warmth, all paternity. It was the voice of a CEO addressing a junior subordinate who had overstepped. That room was never yours, Rhea. 4 words. That was all it took to erase 16 years. To confirm that I was not a daughter in a home, but a tenant on sufferance. An asset whose presence was tolerated, not cherished. The slap hurt. But those words, they shattered something deep inside me. Eleanor gave a curt, satisfied nod. Her work was done. She turned and swept out of the room, her bracelets clinking with a sound of triumphant finality. My father remained in the doorway for a moment longer, his gaze still resolutely fixed on the wall, before he too turned and disappeared, leaving me alone in the blinding light, the chill from the missing duvet seeping into my bones. I didn't cry. Tears felt like a surrender, a luxury I could no longer afford. Instead, I did something else. I began to memorize. I slid off the bed, my legs unsteady, and picked up the pillow. I buried my face in it, inhaling deeply. It didn't smell of sleep or comfort. It smelled of bleach and her perfume, a sharp, aggressive floral scent that clung to everything she owned. It was the smell of sterile control. I memorized it. I memorized the precise pattern of the wood grain on the nightstand where her bracelets had struck. I memorized the detached, analytical look in her eyes. I memorized the way my father's shoulders were slumped in the doorway, the posture of a man choosing the path of least resistance, even if that path led over his own child. I gathered my own pillow and blanket from my room at the back of the house and made a bed on the floor of the drafty living room. In the pre-dawn light, hours later, I crept back to my room. My cheek was a canvas of mottled purple and red, tender to the touch. I pulled out my phone, an old model with a spiderweb of cracks across the screen. I angled my face toward the weak light from the window, my hands shaking slightly, and took a picture. The quality was poor, the image grainy, but the bruise was undeniable. It was proof. With practiced, silent keystrokes, I connected to the neighbor's unsecured Wi-Fi. I opened a browser and created a new, anonymous cloud storage account. The password I chose was "That Room Was Never Yours, Row 1. I created a single folder and named it Contingency. Then, I uploaded the photo. It sat there, a solitary piece of data in a vast digital space. My first piece of evidence, my first secret weapon. The next morning was the day of Northbridge Meridian's quarterly town hall. Northbridge was the packaged food empire my father ran as CEO, and where Eleanor reigned as chief people officer. It was their kingdom. As I stood at the back of the cavernous employee cafeteria, a ghost in the crowd, my cheek throbbing with a dull, persistent ache, Eleanor took the stage. She was radiant under the spotlights, dressed in a crisp white pantsuit, her silver bracelets gleaming. "Here at Northbridge," she began, her voice resonating with a carefully manufactured warmth that made my stomach turn. "We are more than just a company. We are a family." A smattering of polite applause rippled through the room. My father, sitting in the front row, beamed up at her with undisguised pride. I watched him, this man who had stood by as I was struck, and I felt nothing but a vast, cold emptiness. He placed a hand on the shoulder of a line worker beside him, a practiced gesture of solidarity for the internal photographers who were documenting the event. Safety, respect, transparency. The corporate slogans were plastered on banners all around us. Standing there, invisible in the back, I finally understood. The polished floors of this building, the manicured lawns of our house in Norcrest, these were their safe spaces. They were built on a foundation of their comfort, their rules, their power, which meant, by definition, they had to be my danger zones. Their safety was predicated on my silence, my compliance. But the inverse, I realized with a sudden, chilling clarity, must also be true. If I could find a place that was safe for me, truly safe, it would have to be, by its very nature, a place of profound danger for them. A vow formed in my mind, not in words, but in a cold, hard certainty that settled deep in my gut. One day, that room would be mine. Not the physical space with the beige linens and the scent of bleach, but the power it represented, the security it was meant to provide. I would own it, control it, and define its boundaries in a way they could never, ever imagine. They had closed a door on me that night. I would spend the next 16 years building the key to lock them out of their entire kingdom. Northbridge Meridian's headquarters in Grayford is a monument to tasteful, uninspiring corporate architecture. It's a box of smoked glass and brushed steel rising 25 stories, designed to project stability and sterile efficiency. This is the kingdom my father, Arthur Vale, built, or at least, the one he inherited and expanded. And beside him on the throne, in her own seat of power, sits Eleanor. She is not the CEO. That title belongs to my father. He is the face, the patriarch. His official portrait, hanging in the lobby, shows him in an artfully rumpled dress shirt, sleeves rolled up, one hand resting firmly on the shoulder of a factory worker in a hairnet. It's one of a series. Arthur with the sanitation crew, Arthur sharing a laugh with the logistics team, Arthur inspecting a production line, his expression one of profound paternal concern. He is the people's CEO, a man who knows the value of hard work because he oversees it from the top floor. Eleanor, however, holds the title that truly matters for my purposes. Chief People Officer. She is the architect of the company's internal soul. She curates the culture, defines the values, and polices the boundaries of professional conduct. It's a role she was born to play. Their corporate gospel is written on the walls, everywhere you go. In the precise, sans serif Northbridge font, you find the Trinity. Safety, respect, transparency. The words are screen-printed onto frosted glass partitions, embedded in the welcome screens of every monitor, and form the email signature block of every employee. We are a family. The branding whispers, and in this family, we are safe, we are respected, and we are transparent. My own entry into this family was not through the grand front entrance. I came in through the side door, via the Northbridge Meridian Aspire internship program. It was a detail Eleanor herself had arranged, a magnanimous gesture to show that her stepdaughter wasn't receiving any special treatment. I was just another intern in the compliance department, assigned a cubicle in the basement level, far from the executive suites on the 25th floor. My corporate ID was a flimsy piece of plastic. My name, Rhea Vale, printed beneath a grainy, unflattering photo. It lacked the executive signifiers, no gold chip, no special access markers. It was a badge that screamed temporary and unimportant. My desk was a cast-off, a scarred laminate surface shoved into a corner. It didn't even come with a chair. I had to file a formal request with facilities, a process that took 3 days, before a wobbly, mismatched task chair was rolled to my desk. I was a non-entity, a ghost in their machine, and that was exactly how I wanted it. I learned quickly that Eleanor's management style at home translated perfectly to the corporate world. At the house in Norcrest, she had controlled the physical space with a meticulous, oppressive order. The thermostat locked, the pantry inventoried, the guest room preserved as a shrine to her authority. Here at Northbridge, she controlled the linguistic space. She was the master of corporate jargon, the high priestess of palatable, weaponized HR speak. She was the author of the company's conduct policies. I spent my first week reading them. They were magnificent works of art, printed on heavy, gloss-coated paper, bound in crisp blue folders bearing the company logo. The Northbridge Meridian Harassment and Respect in the Workplace Policy was her masterpiece. It was 30 pages of beautifully crafted prose that outlawed everything from unwelcome physical contact to intimidating or offensive verbal conduct. It spoke of zero tolerance and immediate decisive action. It outlined a clear, unambiguous process for reporting violations, and at the bottom of the final page, in a firm, authoritative script, was her signature, Eleanor Vale, Chief People Officer. I held the document in my hands, the paper cool against my skin. I thought of a stinging cheek and the smell of bleach. This policy wasn't a shield to protect the vulnerable. It was a sword, sharpened and weighted, to be used by those in power to define reality. It was a document that proved that what happened to me couldn't have happened, because the rules she herself had written expressly forbade it. My father, in his own way, contributed to my education. He would occasionally drop by my basement cubicle, a carefully choreographed visit to demonstrate his egalitarian nature to the junior staff. He'd lean against my partition, projecting that same paternal warmth from his photographs. "How's my hardest worker?" he'd ask, his voice booming with manufactured pride. "Learning the ropes?" "I am," I'd say, my voice level, professional. "It's a lot to take in." "Good, good." He'd nod, satisfied. "Diligence. That's what gets you ahead. Rhea, I've always said you were a diligent girl." Then came the assignment. It was his idea, presented to my direct manager as a valuable learning opportunity for me. "Let Rhea handle the anonymous hotline queue," he suggested, as if the idea had just struck him. "It's important she understands the real-world concerns of our people from the ground up. It'll build character." And just like that, I was given the keys, not to a room, but to something far more valuable: the company's secret confessional. The anonymous reporting system was a digital Dropbox where employees could submit complaints, tips, and grievances without fear of reprisal. It was, according to the glossy policy, a cornerstone of Northbridge's commitment to transparency. In practice, it was a graveyard of ignored pleas and buried accusations. My job, as the lowly intern, was to be the crypt keeper. I was to read, categorize, and file. I was to tag actionable items for review and non-specific concerns for archival. No one expected me to read them, not really. They expected me to process data, to be a cog. So I sat in my wobbly chair, bathed in the fluorescent hum of the basement, and I began to read. I read for months. I read as I moved from intern to temporary contractor, and then, after proving my diligence and utility, to a full-time entry-level compliance analyst. My plastic badge was replaced with a slightly more permanent one. I got a better chair, but my primary function remained the same. I was the keeper of the queue. The reports were a river of quiet desperation. Complaints about supervisors demanding unpaid overtime, concerns about forklift safety certifications being pencil-whipped. But amidst the noise, patterns began to emerge. A cluster of reports from the third shift, the night shift, at the main Grayford processing plant. The same names appeared, the same supervisors, the same anxieties. "He makes us clock out for cleaning, and then we keep working for another hour. Who can we tell? The safety latch on the number 4 mixer is broken again. They just taped it. Taped it!" Then, I found the first mention. "They keep turning off the camera in hallway 3C on purpose. Everyone knows that's where the shift lead meets." My fingers froze on the keyboard. Camera off. I cross-referenced the date and time with the facility's maintenance logs. Scheduled diagnostic. The official record said. It happened again a week later. Noted in another anonymous report. And again, the maintenance logs always provided a sterile, plausible alibi. And then, I found the phrase that made the blood freeze in my veins. "They use the wellness room on the 23rd floor for things." Not wellness. It's their private place. Got a friend in security who says the log is wiped. What's the point of a safe space if it's their room? That room. My father and Eleanor worked on the 25th floor. The 24th was legal and finance. The 23rd was executive amenities. I pulled up the floor plan. The wellness room was tucked away in a quiet corner, near the executive gym. It was intended for meditation, or for nursing mothers, a quiet, private space, a safe space. I sat back, the hum of the HVAC filling the silence. They had handed me their vulnerabilities, gift-wrapped in a learning opportunity. They saw a quiet, diligent girl, so grateful for a chance to be part of the family that she'd never look beyond the data she was supposed to be filing. They didn't see the girl who had memorized the smell of bleach and floral perfume. They didn't see the girl who had uploaded a photo of a bruise to a cloud server named Contingency. I read every single report. I didn't just file them. I cross-referenced them. I built a shadow database. I correlated dates, names, locations, and maintenance schedules. I read about the night shift. I read about the cameras that conveniently failed. And I read every single word written about that room. I was learning. just as my father had intended. I was learning the architecture of their hypocrisy, and I was quietly, patiently, drawing the blueprint of its collapse. Diligence, my father had said, is what gets you ahead. For 2 years, I was the very picture of diligence. I was the first one in the basement cubicle and the last one to leave. I processed the unprocessable. I categorized the uncategorizable. I became the analyst who knew the anonymous reporting system better than the vendor who had designed it. I wrote macros to find patterns. I built dashboards that tracked complaint clusters by location, shift, and supervisor. My work was meticulous, passionless, and incredibly useful. My superiors, and by extension, Eleanor and my father, mistook my efficiency for ambition. They saw a problem solver who was team-oriented and data-driven. When the previous head of audits retired, I didn't just apply for his job. I submitted a 30-page proposal for restructuring the department into a new, proactive division. Controls and ethics. It was a masterpiece of corporate jargon, all about mitigating risk, future-proofing our integrity, and aligning our practices with our core values. Eleanor, as CPO, loved it. It was another layer of glossy, institutional armor she could present to the board. My father, as CEO, loved it because it sounded efficient and cost-neutral. They gave me the position. Head of Controls and Ethics. I was 30 years old. I moved from the basement to a glass-walled office on the 24th floor, one floor directly beneath them. I had my own budget, a small team, and most importantly, administrative-level access to nearly every system in the company. My first act was to build the vault. To my team, it was simply the Controls and Ethics Secure Archive, a new encrypted server space for handling sensitive investigation materials. But to me, it was the digital successor to that first, grainy photo uploaded to the contingency folder. The vault was my fortress. It was air-gapped from the main company network, accessible only from my terminal, and secured with 3-factor authentication. In it, I began to collate my life's work. I migrated the anonymous reports I'd been saving for years. I pulled the full, uncensored maintenance logs for the Grayford plant. I pulled email archives, using broad search terms related to safety concerns and camera deployment that my new role fully authorized. I downloaded the complete CCTV footage archive for the executive floors, citing a routine audit of high-security protocols, and I began the long, slow, methodical review of Northbridge's procurement and supplier contracts. This was the part of the job that made most people's eyes glaze over, reading 100-page master service agreements. But I wasn't most people. I was the girl who had memorized the smell of bleach. I read every line, and in the master agreement with our largest food-grade packaging supplier, a contract worth hundreds of millions, personally negotiated by my father, I found it. It was a morals clause, buried deep in the subsections on compliance. It was standard boilerplate, but with a specific addendum Northbridge had demanded to look tough on its partners. It stipulated that any verified act of violence, harassment, or intimidation conducted on Northbridge premises by a Northbridge employee, if proven to be ignored by senior management, would trigger a review. This review could lead to the immediate termination of all preferential pricing, volume discounts, and exclusivity agreements. A single act of violence, proven and ignored, could cost them their entire profit margin. I highlighted the section in the digital copy and saved it to the vault. The premises were defined as any property owned, leased, or operated by Northbridge Meridian. With my new access, I turned my attention to the 23rd floor, the wellness room. I began by running an access log audit. It was, after all, my job to control access. The room was protected by a high-security magnetic lock, the kind that logs every single entry and exit by badge ID. I ran the log for the past 12 months. The results were chillingly simple. The log was not wiped. As the anonymous tip had suggested, it was just empty. Almost, day after day, week after week, no one used the wellness room, except for 3 people. Arthur Vale, CEO, Eleanor Vale, CPO, Ria Vale, Head of Controls and Ethics. My new access card, the one that came with my 24th floor office, had been automatically provisioned with access to the entire executive amenities suite. They had given me the key without even thinking about it. I was one of them now. The next step was the camera. A single, wide-angle camera covered the small hallway outside the wellness room. I pulled the maintenance records for that specific camera, cross-referencing them with the dates of the company's 4 quarterly town halls over the past 2 years. The pattern was perfect. On the morning of every single town hall, a work order was generated. Camera 23C temporarily suspended for executive privacy during event, or Camera 23C offline for scheduled power-saving maintenance. Every single time. This was the window. The town hall was when the building was full, when everyone was distracted, when the executive floor was ostensibly empty but for the most senior leadership, it was the perfect time for a private, off-the-record conversation, or a correction. I went to the physical archives in procurement and pulled the hard copy file for our CCTV maintenance vendor. The contract was thick, full of technical specifications. I took it back to my office. Citing my audit, I made a courtesy copy for my files, a full page-by-page scan that I uploaded directly into the vault on my personal physical copy. I took a clear yellow highlighter and marked every page in the corner with a small, invisible dot of UV reactive ink, a physical artifact, just in case. Proof that I had reviewed the binding terms. Now, I had the motive, the location, and the financial weapon. I just needed the final piece of evidence. I had to get inside that room with them. The next quarterly town hall was scheduled in 2 weeks. It was time to set the stage. First, I sent an email to the head of IT. I volunteered to be the controls and ethics liaison on the IT command bridge during the town hall. With everyone logged into the live stream, I wrote, "It's a high-risk moment for data integrity. I want to be on hand to support your team." He was grateful for the all-hands-on-deck attitude. This would give me admin-level visibility of the entire network, including the CCTV feeds, in real time. Second, I needed the maintenance master card. This was the key that could override locks, even high-security ones, and access maintenance panels. It was the skeleton key to the entire building. Getting it required a justification signed by a C-level executive. I drew up a formal audit request on my new letterhead. Subject: Urgent spot check of high-security access point integrity, 23rd floor. I cited 3 new, very real, and very obscure data privacy regulations that had just passed. I outlined a vital need to physically inspect the internal data ports and access log hardware of all sensitive area rooms on the executive floor, including the wellness room, to ensure they were tamper-proof. The request was 3 pages of dense, bureaucratic prose. It was designed to be skimmed and approved by someone too busy to read the details. I routed it through the official channels, directly to Eleanor's queue. 2 days later, the approval came back. A single, digital signature. E. Vale. She hadn't even read it. She was too busy approving the catering menu and the slide decks for the town hall, the event where she and my father would once again speak about family and transparency. I took her signed approval form, walked down to the main facilities department, and handed it to the shift supervisor. He looked at the CPO's signature and the official letterhead. "An audit, huh?" he said, swiping his own card. "Sounds boring." "You have no idea," I replied. He opened a secure lockbox and handed me a heavy, gray plastic card. It had no name, no photo, just the Northbridge logo and a magnetic strip. The maintenance master. "Just make sure it's back by end of day, Ms. Vale." I clipped the card to my belt, next to my own ID. I held the key to her room. I held the key to his company. I held the key to everything. And all I had to do was wait for the day of the town hall. The air in the IT command bridge was thick with the artificial chill of server fans and the smell of ozone. It was T-minus 60 minutes to the all-company town hall. On the main monitor wall, a dozen feeds showed employees filing into the main auditorium. A sea of lanyards and business casual. My team was running final diagnostics on the live stream. Everything was noise, data, and nervous energy. Then, my desktop messenger chimed, a private, high-priority flash from Eleanor Vale. Wellness room, 23rd floor. Now. There was no pretext, no, let's review the slides, just the summons, just the location. My pulse didn't quicken, it did the opposite. It slowed, becoming a heavy, deliberate beat. This was it. I unclipped the gray maintenance MasterCard from my belt and slid it into my pocket, the plastic warm against my leg. I clipped my own ID back in place. I need to check the executive floor's uplink, I said to the IT director. Be back before it starts. He just grunted, his eyes glued to a data flow chart. The elevator ride to the 23rd floor was silent. The doors opened onto a corridor of plush carpet and expensive, empty air. As I had predicted, the small red light on the hallway camera, 23C, was dark. The maintenance order she had approved had done its job. The blind spot was active. Everyone was downstairs. The entire floor was a ghost town, a private stage. I walked to the end of the hall. The wellness room was just a plain maple door with a small silver plaque. I swiped my own access card. The lock chirped green. I pushed the door open. She was standing by the floor-to-ceiling window, a silhouette against the overcast Grayford sky. The room was exactly as I'd imagined. Sterile, beige, furnished with an expensive but uncomfortable-looking sofa, a side table, and a small cabinet. It smelled faintly of industrial carpet cleaner and that same sharp floral perfume. It was the guest room, resurrected 23 floors up. I stepped inside. The door, heavy and soundproofed, swung shut behind me. The magnetic lock engaged with a solid, definitive thud and a high-pitched electronic beep. It was the sound of a vault closing. You wanted to see me, I said. My voice was calm, professional. She turned. The warm maternal mask of the chief people officer was gone. This was the face from my memory. Cold, appraising, and absolutely certain of its own power. You've been busy, she said. It wasn't an accusation. It was a statement of fact. The town hall is a major undertaking. Don't, she snapped. Her voice was low, slicing through the quiet. The audits, the supplier contract reviews, this controls and ethics charade. Her eyes flicked down to my belt, to the empty space where the maintenance card had been. Did you really think I wouldn't notice you pulling system files? It's my job to be thorough, to mitigate risk. Your job, she hissed, taking a step toward me, is what I say it is. Your father and I gave you a place here. We took you in. We gave you a career. And this is how you repay us? Scurrying around in the data vaults like a rat? Looking for what? A way to embarrass us? I didn't answer. I just stood there. My hand went to my pocket, retrieved my phone. On the side table, next to the beige lamp, was a branded Northbridge wireless charging dock, a convenience for executives. I casually placed my phone on it. The screen lit up for a second, confirming the charge, and then went dark. But the microphone was hot. The audio recording app I'd launched in the elevator was running, the waveform silently registering her voice. My placid silence seemed to enrage her more than any argument could have. You've always been like this, she said, her voice dropping to that familiar, venomous whisper. Pushing into places you don't belong. She took another step. We were only a few feet apart now. This room, she said, gesturing to the sterile walls, is for executive use. It's a private space. It's not for your kind. It's not for ambitious, ungrateful little intruders. The word hung in the air, a physical weight. She had waited 16 years to use it again. I had waited 16 years to hear it. And just like that night, the hand came. It wasn't a frenzied swing. It was precise, controlled, a corporate-level assault. It was the same dry, flat thwack that had echoed in the guest room. My head snapped to the side. The sting was immediate, a perfect, burning replica of the past. The impact was so clean it seemed to displace the air in the room, pulling in a new scent, the sharp chemical tang of the hand sanitizer dispenser mounted by the door. bleach and flowers and alcohol. The memory and the moment fused. I staggered back, more from the shock of the perfect repetition than the force. My heel hit the metal medical cabinet against the wall, and it rattled. And then, from the hallway, a man's voice, low, urgent, and terrified. My father. "Eleanor! Not here! Not where people can see!" He hadn't entered. He was just outside, his voice muffled by the heavy door he must have cracked open. The eternal spectator, the accomplice, making sure the crime wasn't witnessed. Eleanor froze. Her hand was still half raised. She was breathing hard, her eyes wide with a sudden flash of, not regret, but tactical panic. I straightened up, my entire cheek on fire, but my mind was a block of ice. I didn't touch my face. I didn't cry. I did exactly what I had trained myself to do. I observed. I lifted my gaze from her, past her shoulder, to the far upper corner of the room, and there it was. A small black dome, an internal security camera. Of course, this was a sensitive room, a place for C-suite to have difficult conversations, to fire people, to handle crises. It wasn't on the main building feed, the one she had ordered shut down. It was a self-contained system, and just below it, on the wall-mounted junction box, a single, tiny, green LED was blinking, a steady, rhythmic pulse. Recording to local storage. She had approved the maintenance order for the hallway camera. She had meticulously created a blind spot outside the room, all to ensure this very confrontation would be private. She had built her own trap and then, with perfect, arrogant precision, had walked right into it. Eleanor followed my gaze. She saw the dome, but it meant nothing to her. She believed she controlled the system. She believed she was safe. I slowly brought my eyes back down to meet hers. The smile on my face must have been terrifying. It was the only part of me that didn't hurt. "This room," I said, my voice quiet, but it filled the small space. "It belongs to the company." Her panic evaporated, replaced by a sudden, cruel amusement. She laughed. A short, sharp, ugly sound. She smoothed the front of her expensive blazer, regaining her composure. "Oh, darling," she mocked. "Don't be so naive. This company belongs to this family." I took a step toward her, my smile widening, pulling at the raw skin of my cheek. "I know," I whispered. "For the first time in my life, Eleanor, I completely believe you, and legally, that's all that matters." I walked past her. I picked up my phone from the charger. The red recording icon was still pulsing on the black screen. I stopped the recording and saved the file. "I didn't use the MasterCard. I used my own," I badged out. The lock chirped its polite, electronic beep-boop. I pulled the heavy door open. The hallway was empty. My father was gone. He had already run. I stepped out, my phone in my hand, the gray maintenance card heavy in my pocket. The town hall was starting in 25 minutes. I had an audio file to upload and a local storage drive to retrieve. My first stop was not the IT command bridge. It was my office on the 24th floor. I locked the door, dropped the gray MasterCard on my desk, and plugged my phone into my terminal. The audio file transferred in seconds. Wellness War Rec Final, MP3. I uploaded it to the vault. Then, I used the MasterCard, not for a room, but for the 23rd floor data closet, the closet that housed the local storage drive for the wellness room's camera. My audit paperwork covered this. I slotted the card. The lock clicked open. Inside, a small, humming server rack. I found the right drive, labeled BubR 23 Local. I jacked in with a secure drive, bypassed the minimal security. They never expected an internal breach. And found the file, a 14-second MP4 file, time-stamped just 7 minutes prior. I copied it. I wiped the access log. I relocked the closet. The entire operation took less than 3 minutes. Back in my office, I uploaded the video to the vault. Then, I opened the final folder, the one labeled Norcrest Trust. A week ago, I had received a letter, not from a law firm, but from the Norcrest Trust and Fiduciary Office. It was about my grandfather, Arthur Vale Sr. the man who had actually built Northbridge Meridian from a single canning factory. He was a hard, cold man who believed in principles more than people, and he had despised the soft corporate culture my father and Eleanor had built on top of his foundation. He died years ago, leaving me nothing but a small, non-voting block of preferred shares, or so I was told. The letter was a formality, a legal notification that I, Rhea Vale, had reached the age and tenure at the company to be informed of the special conditions attached to my inheritance. The shares were, as I knew, non-voting, worthless, in terms of power, but they came with a rider, an ethics covenant my grandfather, in his paranoid foresight, had embedded in the trust. The clause was bizarre, specific, and brilliant. It stated that if a direct lineal descendant, me, who was also an employee of Northbridge Meridian, could provide irrefutable proof of repeated patterns of violence or moral malfeasance perpetrated by C-level executives, with at least one instance occurring on company premises, my non-voting preferred shares would immediately convert. They would become, for a period of 90 days, a golden share with temporary absolute veto power over any and all matters of executive compensation, appointments, and removals. It was a dead man's switch, a legal bomb planted in the company's bylaws, waiting for a very specific key. My grandfather, it turned out, had seen his son. He knew who my father was. He knew what Eleanor was, and he had given me a weapon, knowing that one day they would provide me with the ammunition. The required proof was specific. It had to establish a pattern. It needed a baseline, a past event to establish the history, and a present event to prove the pattern had breached the corporate walls. I had spent the last week with the trust's lawyer, a dry, methodical man in Norcrest, who seemed to take a quiet, procedural pleasure in all of this. He had confirmed my interpretation of the clause. Now I had the final piece. I opened a secure portal to the lawyer's office. I didn't send an email. I uploaded an evidentiary package. I was no longer a victim. I was a plaintiff. My style was not emotional. It was legalistic, rational, and cold. Item 1. Exhibit A, baseline event, family, contingency 01, JPG, a grainy time-stamped photo of a 16-year-old girl's bruised cheek, metadata intact. Item 2. Exhibit B, corporate event, premises, audio. Wellness Wire Rec/Final, MP3. File contains CPO. Eleanor Vale stating, "This room is not for your kind. Pushing into places you don't belong, and the distinct, dry sound of a slap. It also contains CEO Arthur Vale's voice from the hallway. Not here. Not where people can see," confirming both the act and the conspiracy to hide it. Item 3. Exhibit C, corporate event, premises, video, WR23 local clip, MP4, a 14-second, silent video file from the internal camera of room 23, showing CPO Vale striking employee R. Vale. Item 4. Exhibit D, corroboration of premises, floor plan 23.pdf, official company schematic, and access logs 23WW, CSV, my badge in. My lawyer had already prepared the argument. The wellness room is designated as common employee amenity space in all corporate charters and leases. It is not, and has never been, a private office. It is unequivocally company premises. Item 5. Exhibit E, corroboration of intent, WO23C Town Hall, PDF, the approved maintenance order, signed by E. Vale, to disable the hallway camera 23C, proving intent to create a private, unwatched space for the confrontation. I hit submit. The next 10 minutes were a blur of legal adrenaline. My trust lawyer, having been prepped, filed the package with the probate court overseeing the trust. He simultaneously filed for an emergency temporary restraining order and preservation order, citing imminent risk of spoliation of evidence by the executives in question. At 1:47 p.m., 13 minutes before the town hall, a county judge signed the order. The court immediately served Northbridge Meridian's general counsel all CCTV and local storage data, specifically for floor 23, was to be preserved. All access logs frozen. Any attempt to delete or alter the data would be contempt of court. At 1:52 p.m., the general counsel of the board of directors, an external firm, not our internal legal department, received a second devastating notification. This one came from the Norcrest Trust Office. It stated, in the driest legal prose, that the ethics covenant of the Vale Family Trust, Series A Preferred, had been successfully invoked by its beneficiary, Ms. Rhea Vale, effective immediately. Her shares had been converted. A temporary, overriding veto power was now active and would be in place pending the agenda for the upcoming C-suite bonus and retention vote. My father and Eleanor were walking toward the stage, shaking hands, smiling. They thought they had just put me in my place, privately and deniably. They thought the worst they had to fear was an HR complaint that Eleanor herself would quash. I told no one. I didn't tell my colleagues in IT. I didn't tell my own team. I didn't even tell the one junior analyst I almost trusted. In this world, the one they had built, information was only valuable if it was asymmetrical. A shared secret was a liability. A unilateral one was a weapon. Surprise is its own form of evidence. It's the one that proves your opponent never saw you as a threat. I left my office, my face a mask of professional calm, the stinging on my cheek a dull, hot reminder. I walked down to the IT command bridge, just behind the main stage. The town hall was beginning. The auditorium buzzed with the low-grade, caffeinated energy of 1,000 captive employees. The theme of this quarter's town hall was Our Northbridge Home. Banners hanging from the ceiling showed smiling, multi-ethnic families enjoying Northbridge brand-packaged meals. My father and Eleanor sat in the center of the front row, looking regal. He was the benevolent king. She was the nurturing queen of their corporate castle. From my station at the IT command bridge, set up just behind the stage curtain, I had a perfect view of both the audience and the massive LED screen that dominated the stage. I was officially here to ensure a smooth technical presentation. My name was even on the agenda. A small, bulleted item under the main event. Culture and Safety Scorecard, Update, Rhea Vale, Head of Controls and Ethics. It was my segment, my 10 minutes. They had given me the stage, the microphone, and the projector. They had no idea I was about to burn their house down with the tools they'd handed me. The slide deck I had submitted for approval was a masterpiece of corporate banality. It was filled with pie charts about mandatory training completion rates and bar graphs showing a marginal decrease in minor workplace safety incidents. It was exactly the kind of data-driven self-congratulation they expected. But embedded in the presentation file was a final, hidden slide. Slide Final, PPEX. It was dormant. It could not be accessed by clicking Next. It was linked to a simple script, an execution command triggered by a single input. The swipe of my specific, high-clearance IT liaison access card on the portable reader connected to my laptop. My father finished his opening remarks, a soaring speech about market share and shareholder value, peppered with anecdotes about his family on the factory floor. He received a warm, obligatory round of applause. Then he introduced Eleanor. She walked to the podium, a vision in cobalt blue. She radiated a calm, compassionate authority that I knew, with intimate, painful certainty, was a masterful performance. She placed her hands on the podium, leaned into the microphone, and smiled a smile that did not reach her eyes. "Thank you, Arthur," she began, her voice smooth as silk. "It's so wonderful to see all of you today. When Arthur and I talk about our goals for this company, we don't just talk about numbers on a spreadsheet. We talk about people. We talk about community." She paused for effect, her gaze sweeping across the auditorium. "Because Northbridge isn't just a place to work. We want it to be a home, a place where you feel safe, a place where you feel respected, a place where you can bring your whole self to work, knowing that this family will support you." I stood in the wings, the cool, sterile air of the backstage area, a stark contrast to the warm, manufactured sentiment she was spewing. My laptop was open on its stand. My right hand rested on the small black card reader. My finger traced the edge of my ID card. "This family will support you." The lie was so profound, so audacious. It was almost beautiful. She continued for another 10 minutes, a symphony of HR-approved platitudes. Then came my cue. "And to talk more about our ongoing commitment to that safety and transparency," she said, smiling brightly, "I'd like to welcome our head of controls and ethics, Rhea Vale." I walked onto the stage to polite, scattered applause. I shook Eleanor's hand, her skin dry and cool. "Thank you, Eleanor," I said into the microphone, my voice even and clear. I looked out at the sea of faces, and then to the front row, where my father gave me a small, encouraging nod, the diligent daughter, making him proud. "Good afternoon, everyone," I began. As Eleanor said, safety and respect are the cornerstones of our Northbridge home. I clicked through my approved slides. The pie charts appeared. The bar graphs drew themselves. I spoke the language of compliance, of audits, of procedural integrity. The audience's eyes began to glaze over. This was the boring, mandatory part of the day. I saw my father check his watch. Perfect. "But transparency," I said, my tone shifting slightly, "means looking at all the data, even when it's uncomfortable." I reached the end of the approved presentation. The screen showed a bland thank you slide with the Northbridge logo. "However," I continued, "my department has been analyzing some specific data points that I believe are crucial for us to understand as a family. I have one final slide." Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Eleanor stiffen slightly at the podium behind me. This was not in the script, in the front row. My father's brow furrowed. I turned back to my laptop stand as if to cue the final slide. My hand closed over my ID card. I slid it through the reader. The small machine beeped, a sound only I could hear. The thank you slide vanished. The screen blinked once, then resolved into a new image. It was a clean, corporate bar graph, just like the others. But this one was different. The title read, "Anonymous Complaints. Night Shift, Grayford Plant. Verse, Hallway 3C, Camera Outages." There were two sets of bars. One, in blue, showed a low, steady baseline of anonymous complaints. The other, in red, showed sharp, dramatic spikes. Every single red spike lined up perfectly with a specific date over the past 2 years. The date of each quarterly town hall. A low murmur rippled through the auditorium. People were leaning forward, squinting at the screen. They could see the pattern. "As you can see," I said, my voice cutting through the noise, "there's a troubling correlation. On the days our executive team is gathered here, celebrating our culture, complaints of a sensitive nature from our most vulnerable shifts spike dramatically. These also happen to be the only days our key security cameras in that sector experience outages." I looked directly at my father. His encouraging smile was gone. It was replaced by a hard, confused frown. He looked from the screen to me, a silent question in his eyes. "What are you doing?" I gave him the smallest, most respectful nod, as if to say, "Just presenting the data, sir." Then, I swiped my card again. The graph was replaced by a new image. It was a scanned PDF of a maintenance work order. The details were clearly legible on the massive screen. "Temporarily suspend camera 23C. In the box for reason, a single phrase was typed. To conserve power during low-traffic event." And at the bottom, in the approved by box, was a signature, circled in a stark, digital red, E. Vale. The murmur in the crowd grew louder. This wasn't an abstract correlation anymore. This was a document, a name, an action. My father was no longer looking at me. He was staring at Eleanor, who stood frozen behind me, her face pale. I turned from the screen to face the audience. "It seems our commitment to power saving has created a significant gap in our commitment to employee safety," I said. "It raises the question of ownership. and of what happens in the spaces we can't see. I paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. A home has rooms, I said, my voice dropping slightly, becoming more personal. And in any home, it's important to know who has the keys, who has control. Today, we're going to check the ownership of one of those rooms. With that, I swiped my card a final time. The screen displaying the signed work order flickered and went completely black. The abrupt darkness sucked the sound from the room. For a full 3 seconds, the only light was the stage lighting on me. The only sound, the hum of the building's ventilation. The audience held a collective breath. Then, the screen came to life. There was no branding, no graphics. It was raw, silent, wide-angle footage. The view of a security camera. Looking down a sterile, beige room, it was the feed from the local drive, the feed the court order had just unsealed. The silence in the auditorium was absolute. The 14 seconds of video played out on the giant screen with a horrifying, high-definition clarity. There was no dramatic music, only the cold, ambient sound of the room's ventilation system. The footage showed 2 women. One, the company's revered chief people officer. The other, the newly appointed head of controls and ethics. The CPO's face was a mask of fury. My face was a study in calm defiance. Her voice, sharp and low, was perfectly captured by my phone's microphone. Not for your kind, not for ambitious, ungrateful little intruders. Then came the motion, the arms swinging in a clean, vicious arc. The sharp, dry crack of the slap echoed through the auditorium's state-of-the-art sound system. 1,000 people heard it. 1,000 people saw my head snap to the side. And then, just as a collective gasp began to form, a new voice entered the scene, muffled, urgent, coming from just outside the room in the video. My father's voice. "Eleanor, not here, not where people can see." The video played to its end, leaving the final image of me. Standing alone, as the door closed, a wave of confusion and shock washed over the audience. Whispers erupted like brush fires. People were turning to each other, their faces a mixture of disbelief and dawning comprehension. I let the whispers build for a moment. Then, with a single keystroke on my laptop, I rewound the clip and played it again. This time, I was ready. The moment her hand reached the apex of its swing, the very instant before impact, I hit pause. The image froze. It was a work of art, a 50-foot-tall portrait of corporate hypocrisy. Eleanor, the architect of respect in the workplace, her face contorted in a snarl of rage, her hand raised, her silver bracelets glinting under the office lights, and me, her target, standing perfectly still. My face turned towards her, awaiting the blow. Behind her, through the window, the Northbridge Meridian logo on a neighboring building was perfectly framed. I let the image burn itself onto the retinas of every employee, every manager, every single person in that room. I turned to face them. In the front row, Eleanor looked like a statue carved from ice. My father was staring at the screen, his mouth slightly agape, the blood drained from his face. He looked from the giant, monstrous image of his wife to me, standing small and composed on the stage. He finally understood that he was not watching a presentation. He was watching an execution. I stepped forward to the podium, my voice devoid of all emotion. It was the voice of a lawyer, a prosecutor, reading the indictment. Under the master service agreement with our primary logistics and packaging partner, Keystone Industries, Section 11, Subsection B, there exists a standard morals clause, which Northbridge Meridian itself insisted upon. I paused. The general counsel, a man named Marcus Thorne who sat with the other board members in a reserved section, was now staring at me intently. "I'll read the relevant passage," I continued, my voice steady. "Should a senior executive of Northbridge Meridian be found, with verifiable evidence, to have engaged in an act of physical violence on company premises, and should that act be demonstrably concealed or ignored by other members of the executive committee, Keystone Industries reserves the right to declare an immediate breach of contract." The room was silent again. They were beginning to understand. This wasn't just about a slap. It was about money. Such a breach, I stated, my eyes scanning the front row. Triggers two immediate penalties. First, the forfeiture of all negotiated volume discounts and preferential pricing, retroactive to the beginning of the fiscal year. Second, it mandates a formal review of Northbridge Meridian's status as a certified federal contractor, given the documented failure of internal controls. I let the words hang in the air. Forfeiture of discounts, review of federal contracts. I had just outlined the complete and utter devastation of their profit margins. I had just threatened the multi-billion-dollar government contracts that were the bedrock of their processed foods division. The act you have just witnessed, I said, gesturing to the frozen image on the screen, occurred less than an hour ago on the 23rd floor of this building, on company premises, and the attempt to conceal it, by the CEO himself, was also recorded. Now for the final piece, the one that moved this from a corporate crisis to a personal checkmate. Furthermore, I announced, as of 1:52 p.m. today, the board of directors was notified by the Norcrest Trust Office of a change in my shareholder status. I held up a single, folded piece of paper. It was the letter from the trust. Pursuant to the ethics covenant established by the late Arthur Vail Sr., my preferred, non-voting shares have been temporarily converted. The covenant has been legally invoked and validated. This grants me a single temporary power, the absolute and immediate right of veto over all matters of C-suite compensation, appointments, and removals. A chair scraped loudly against the floor. Marcus Thorne, the board's external counsel, was on his feet. He was a tall, severe-looking man. He looked at me, then at the horrified board members beside him. "She is correct," Thorne announced, his voice booming with legal authority. "Our firm has received the notification from the trust. We have reviewed the covenant. It is unorthodox, but it is legally binding. Ms. Vail's temporary veto power is active." The room erupted. The carefully constructed facade of the Northbridge home had just been demolished. Eleanor finally found her voice. She stumbled forward from her seat behind me, her face a mess of panic and disbelief. "This is ridiculous. It's staged," she stammered, pointing a shaking finger at the screen. "She staged this. It's a fabrication." I turned to face her. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "Eleanor," I said, my voice cutting cleanly through the noise. "The only thing staged in this room is the corporate slogan hanging on the banner right behind you." My words landed like a punch. Her mouth snapped shut. The audience followed my gaze to the giant safety, respect, transparency banner hanging over the stage. A few people actually laughed. A sharp, bitter sound. My father finally moved. He pushed himself to his feet, his eyes wild. He wasn't looking at the screen anymore. He was looking only at me. The years fell away. He wasn't a CEO. He was just a man trapped in a doorway, watching something terrible unfold, finally realizing he could no longer just turn and walk away. "Rhea," he pleaded, his voice cracking. "What do you want? What is it you want?" It was the question I had been waiting 16 years to answer. I looked at this man, my father, who had chosen comfort over his child, and then at the woman who had taught me the true meaning of violence. I looked at the frozen image of her on the screen. I looked out at the 1,000 employees who had been living under the shadow of their lies. I lifted the microphone. "A door closed," I said. "Right now." My words hung in the super-chilled, electrified air of the auditorium. A door closed. Right now. It was not a request. It was an order. The frozen tableau on the screen, Eleanor's hand raised, my father's panicked voice a fresh, damning echo, was the only thing holding the room in a state of suspended animation. Then, chaos began to ripple outwards from the front row. Board members were leaning into each other, their faces pale masks of shock and frantic calculation. The general counsel, Marcus Thorne, was already speaking quietly but urgently into his phone. I ignored them. I ignored the 1,000 pairs of eyes staring at me. I ignored Eleanor, who now looked not angry, but simply broken, a marionette with her strings cut. I ignored my father, who was staring at me with the bewildered terror of a man who had just watched his own house, which he thought was made of stone, crumble into dust. My focus was singular. I turned my body slightly to address Marcus Thorne and the huddle of board members directly. My voice, amplified by the podium microphone, was cold, clear, and procedural. "Mr. Thorne," I began, and he looked up from his phone, his expression grim. "As the acting legal authority for the board of directors, please consider this my formal declaration. I am now exercising the temporary power vested in me by the Vale Family Trust." I took a breath. The words had been rehearsed in my mind for years, but saying them aloud was like setting a final, heavy stone in place. First, I hereby exercise my veto on the approval of any and all pending and future performance bonuses, stock options, and compensation packages for the Chief Executive Officer, Arthur Vale, and the Chief People Officer, Eleanor Vale. A sharp intake of breath came from the board members. This was real. This was financial. Second, I continued, my voice unwavering, I demand their immediate, temporary removal from their duties and from these premises, on paid leave, pending a full, independent, board-led investigation into the events just witnessed, the evidence presented, and the systemic issues of workplace safety and executive conduct they represent. This was the kill shot, not a firing, a removal, a quarantine. I was using their own HR language against them. Thorne didn't flinch. He was a lawyer, and he was already 5 steps ahead, calculating risk. He knew what the Keystone contract was worth. He knew the cost of a federal debarment hearing. He looked at Arthur and Eleanor, no longer as colleagues, but as liabilities to be managed. The bylaws require a simple majority vote of the board for an emergency action of this nature, Thorne announced to his colleagues, his voice loud enough for the first few rows to hear. "The circumstances are extraordinary. I recommend we convene immediately." They didn't even leave their seats. They formed a tight, panicked circle right there in the front row, a frantic, whispering huddle of expensive suits. I could hear snippets of their conversation. The Keystone Morals Clause is ironclad. Federal contract exposure is catastrophic. The trust is validated. We have no choice. She has us. Marcus, she has us cold. It took them 90 seconds. Thorne stood up, straightening his tie. He faced the audience, but he was speaking to me. "The board of directors has voted, by a majority of 7-1, we have approved a motion to place Mr. Vale and Ms. Vale on administrative leave, effective immediately, pending an external investigation." He then turned to my father and Eleanor. "Arthur, Eleanor, security will escort you from the building. Please cooperate." 2 uniformed security guards, who usually spent their days checking badges, walked hesitantly toward the front row. My father didn't even seem to see them. He just kept staring at me, his face a hollow mask. Eleanor, however, began to sob, a quiet, defeated sound that was swallowed by the vastness of the auditorium. The town hall was over, but I wasn't finished. As security led my father and stepmother away, I turned back to the board. This company now has a massive leadership and integrity vacuum. The investigation will take time, but the employees, especially those who have been most at risk, need assurance now. Thorne nodded, understanding immediately. "What do you propose, Ms. Vale?" "The trust grants me this power for 90 days. During that time, I request the board appoint me as a temporary, independent ethics and controls monitor, with full authority to implement immediate remedial actions to secure the safety and integrity of this company's operations and its employees." It was audacious. I was asking them to hand the keys to the whistleblower, but they had no choice. Refusing would look like a cover-up. Approving it would look like decisive action. It was the best, cleanest PR move they had. Thorne conferred with the others for another 30 seconds. He turned back. "The board approves your temporary appointment. Congratulations. Ms. Vale. I gave a single, sharp nod. I stepped away from the podium, walked back to my laptop at the IT bridge, and began to work. My reign had begun. My first act was to send a company-wide email. It was not drafted by committee, it was from me. Subject: immediate policy. Change: all rooms are safe rooms. To all Northbridge employees. Effective immediately. The protocol allowing for the deactivation of security cameras for power saving or any other non-emergency reason is permanently rescinded. All cameras in all Northbridge facilities will be active and recording 24/7. They are essential safety infrastructure, not an optional utility. Furthermore, the internal anonymous reporting system is suspended. A new confidential reporting channel, managed by the external law firm of Sterling & Dunn, is now active. All submissions are covered by attorney-client privilege. You can report without fear. Your voice will be heard, and it will be protected. My second act was a formal, signed directive to the Human Resources and Plant Management Divisions in Grayford. Subject: Directive of Employment Preservation. Grayford Night Shift. No employee, contractor, or temporary worker assigned to the night shift at the Grayford plant is to be terminated, disciplined, or have their hours reduced for any reason without the express written consent of the undersigned for the next 90 days. We will protect those who have been most vulnerable. I signed it, scanned it, and sent it. It was a shield, extended over the 1,000 nameless, faceless voices I had read in the dark of my basement office for years. My final act for the day was simpler. I walked to the printing room, my heels clicking on the marble floor. The building was in a state of controlled chaos. People were gathered in small groups, whispering, looking at me with a mixture of fear, awe, and disbelief as I passed. I ignored them. I printed 20 copies of a single-page document. I took a roll of tape from a supply closet and rode the elevator up to the 23rd floor. The hallway was empty. The door to the wellness room was closed. I taped the notice squarely in the center of the maple door. Then I went down to the 22nd floor, the 21st, and so on. I taped the notice to the door of every break room, every cafeteria, every common space in the building. The notice was simple. It was the company's new motto. Every room in this company is a safe place. It does not belong to any single individual. It belongs to all of us. As I was taping the final notice to the glass wall of the main lobby, a janitor who I recognized from the night shift was emptying a trash can nearby. He was an older man with tired eyes. He stopped what he was doing and watched me. He read the notice, he looked at me, and for a moment, our eyes met. He didn't smile. He just gave a slow, deliberate nod, a single gesture of acknowledgement, of understanding. For the first time since I had walked into this building as an intern, the word home didn't feel like a lie. It felt like a possibility. I turned to walk away, my work for the day done. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. It was a new email. The subject line formal and dry. From Norcrest Trust and Fiduciary Office. Subject: Official confirmation of covenant activation. Dear Ms. Vale, this email serves as official legal confirmation that the terms of the Vale Family Trust Ethics Covenant have been successfully invoked and are now in full effect. I didn't need to read the rest. I closed the email. The lock had clicked. The door was closed, and I was the one, finally, holding the key. The chaos of the town hall subsided not into calm, but into a thick, watchful silence that permeated every floor of the Northbridge Meridian building. The king and queen had been deposed, escorted from their own castle by low-level security guards, and in their place, a ghost from the basement now occupied the throne on the 24th floor. My office, once a simple glass box, had become the de facto center of gravity for the entire company. I spent the next 2 hours in a state of hyper-focused activity, fueled not by adrenaline, but by a cold, methodical clarity 16 years in the making. I didn't celebrate. There was no triumph, only the grim satisfaction of a long-overdue equation finally being solved. My first call was with Marcus Thorne, the board's counsel. His voice was stripped of all niceties. It was the sound of pure, unadulterated damage control. "The board has approved your temporary role," he said without preamble. "We're drafting the announcement. We need your 30-day plan by morning." "You'll have it in an hour," I replied. "Good. One more thing, Ms. Vale," he added, a new, strange note of deference in his voice. "Our firm has finished its preliminary review of the full trust documentation from Norcrest. There appears to be an addendum to the ethics covenant, a continuance clause." I waited. "The 90-day term," he explained, "is the minimum. The clause states that if the veto power is triggered by an act of violence leading to the suspension or removal of a C-level executive, the beneficiary's veto power does not expire. It remains fully in effect until the board successfully ratifies new permanent appointments to the vacated roles." The line went silent for a moment as I processed the full weight of his words. It wasn't a 90-day reign, it was indefinite. My grandfather hadn't just given me a key to the door, he had given me the deed to the entire building, contingent on my ability to find and appoint a worthy successor. My veto power was now the gatekeeper for the future leadership of Northbridge Meridian. I had not just closed a door on them. I now stood as the sole guard in front of the empty thrones. "I understand," I said, my voice perfectly level. "Thank you for the clarification. Mr. Thorne?" I hung up the phone. A slow, deep exhale I didn't know I was holding escaped my lips. The room wasn't just a room, it was control. Total, absolute, legal control. I turned to my computer and began to type. The 30-day remediation and integrity plan was not a proposal. It was a directive. Phase 1, Week 1, Stabilization and Transparency. Action 1.1, a top-to-bottom, third-party cultural audit, to be conducted by a firm of my choosing. Anonymous interviews with employees at all levels, with a focus on the Grayford night shift. Action 1.2, immediate restoration and expansion of the camera security budget, all blind spots to be eliminated. The new budget will be a permanent protected line item, not subject to power-saving cuts. Action 1.3, a company-wide email, to be sent from my office, containing the unedited 14-second video from the wellness room, along with a link to the new, externally managed whistleblower channel. No more secrets. Phase 2, Weeks 2 to 4, Accountability and Education. Action 2.1, mandatory, scenario-based ethics and leadership training for every employee at the vice president level and above. Attendance is not optional. Failure to complete is grounds for a formal performance review. Action 2.2, the creation of a permanent, independent ethics review committee, composed of both internal employees and external experts, with the authority to review all executive-level complaints. I saved the document as a PDF and emailed it to Marcus Thorne and the entire board. There was no room for negotiation. By late afternoon, the news had broken. My phone was a vibrating brick of notifications from numbers I didn't recognize. A quick search showed the headlines. Northbridge Meridian CEO, CPO ousted in shocking town hall takedown. Vale heiress wields obscure clause to seize control. One outlet had already coined the nickname that would stick: the whistleblower with the keys. I didn't answer a single call. I didn't read a single article. The story was no longer theirs to tell. It was mine to write, with actions, not words. As the sun began to dip low, casting long shadows across the city, I left my office. I needed to do one last thing. I took the elevator to the 23rd floor. The plush hallway was silent. A vacuum-sealed time capsule from just a few hours before. I walked to the end of the hall, to the maple door with the small silver plaque. I held up my ID badge, the one they had given me, thinking it was a leash. I touched it to the reader. There was no hostile beep this time, just a soft, green click. I pushed the door. It swung inward silently, perfectly balanced on its hinges. It felt like a quiet, mechanical apology. The room was exactly as I had left it, sterile, beige, and now, completely stripped of its power, it was just a room, an empty space. I walked over to the door and removed the generic wellness room plaque. From my bag, I pulled out a new one I'd had made in the print shop an hour before. It was simple, in the official Northbridge font. Wellness room. Property of the employees of Northbridge Meridian. I affixed it to the door, a small declarative act of reclamation. On the small side table, I idly pulled open the drawer. Inside, amidst some old stationery and a dried-out pen, was a single, old-fashioned brass key. It was a skeleton key, the kind used for antique furniture. It probably unlocked a desk that had been replaced a decade ago. It was obsolete, powerless, and utterly useless. It was perfect. I slipped it into my pocket. It was a souvenir, a small, heavy reminder of a lock that could no longer hold anyone. Back in my office, I composed one last email for the day. The recipient was all employees at Northbridge, Camage. The subject was simple: the new policy. The body of the email contained only two things: a direct link to the full, unedited video of the assault, and an attached PDF of the new, mandatory workplace safety and respect policies I had just signed into effect. I hit send. The message flew out to thousands of inboxes, a digital bombshell of absolute transparency. The door was not just closed, it was sealed. A moment later, my personal phone buzzed on the desk. It was a text message from my father. "You have destroyed this family." I looked at his words, the last gasp of a man who still defined the world by the four walls of his own house, unable to see the prison it had become for others. I felt a flicker of something, not pity, not sadness, but a distant, clinical understanding of his profound blindness. My fingers moved across the screen, my reply swift and final. I didn't destroy a family. I just closed the wrong door so that 1,000 right ones could finally be opened. I put the phone down, face down on the desk. I didn't need to see if he replied. In my pocket, my fingers closed around the small, cold, useless brass key. I had everything I needed. The roar hit me in waves. It wasn't the polite, obligatory applause from the start of the town hall. This was a physical force, a sudden, violent release of pressure from 1,000 people at once. It was a raw, cathartic sound that had been held in check for years. It started in the back, in the cheap seats, with the analysts, the data entry clerks, the facilities staff, and it rolled forward, engulfing the stunned managers and shell-shocked VPs, until the entire auditorium was a single deafening wall of noise. Security was moved, escorting my father and Eleanor from the front row. They looked small, their shoulders slumped, their corporate armor shattered. They were no longer executives. They were just two people being led from a room, their faces pale and uncomprehending, the giant 50-foot image of Eleanor, her hand raised in that frozen, violent gesture, still hung above them, a monstrous monument to their reign. I stood at the podium, the microphone still live in my hand. The board members were in a frantic huddle, their faces ashen, their phones pressed to their ears, but they didn't matter, not in this moment. The only thing that mattered was the sea of faces staring up at me. They were standing now, their expressions a wild mix of shock, vindication, and a terrifying, dawning hope. I had to close the door. I held up my free hand, and the wave of sound slowly receded, diminishing to an electric, buzzing silence. Every eye was on me. 16 years ago, I said, my voice perfectly clear, amplified to fill the entire space. I was told that a room I was in did not belong to me, that I was an intruder. I looked out, my gaze sweeping from the front row to the very back, trying to see every face. It was a lesson in power, a lesson on who gets to draw the boundaries, who gets to decide who is safe and who is not. For years, this company has operated on that same broken lesson, a lesson that says some people are more protected than others, a lesson that says some rooms are private, off-limits, and dangerous for those not invited, a lesson that allows cameras to be turned off and voices to be silenced. I paused, letting the weight of the last hour settle over them. Today, that lesson is over. I took a deep breath, the air sharp and cold. They told me that room was never mine. Today, I am telling all of you, every single safe room in this company belongs to all of us. The roar that came back this time was a single, unified explosion. It was a physical thing, a shockwave that rattled the glass sound booth at the back of the hall. It was the sound of 1,000 locks breaking at once. And as the applause thundered, I turned to my laptop on the podium and pressed a single key. The massive screen behind me, the 50-foot monument to Eleanor's rage, flickered and died. It went completely black. For a second, the vast, dark surface became a mirror. And in it, I saw the reflection of the auditorium. I saw 1,000 people on their feet. And I saw myself, a tiny, solitary figure on the stage, dwarfed by the sheer scale of the collective body behind me. I was just a speck, a single point of light reflected in the void, and I knew, with absolute certainty, that this was right. I was small. We were large. I didn't wait for the applause to fade. This was not a performance. I turned, gathered my laptop, and walked off the stage. I didn't look at the board members, who were already gesturing frantically for me. I didn't look back at the empty, darkened screen. I walked through the side exit, and the heavy, soundproof door swung shut behind me, cutting off the wall of sound as cleanly as a blade. Silence. I was in the backstage corridor. The air was cool and still. I walked to the elevator, my heels clicking on the polished concrete. I pressed the button for the 23rd floor. The ride up was a strange, suspended moment. The building felt hollow, as if the entire event downstairs had been a dream. The doors slid open onto the plush, silent corridor of the executive floor. This was a ghost ship. The air was thick with the smell of expensive carpet and old, unchallenged power. I walked the length of the hall. I stopped in front of it. The maple door. The small silver plaque. Wellness room. My hand was perfectly steady as I raised my ID badge, the one they had given me, believing it was a tool of my compliance. I touched it to the black reader. There was no hostile beep, just a soft, permissive click. The small LED flashed green. I pushed the door. It swung open on silent, expensive hinges. A whisper of displaced air. The room was exactly as I had left it. The beige sofa, the cabinet, the faint, lingering trace of her floral perfume, and the chemical tang of hand sanitizer. The memory of the slap was still a hot ghost on my cheek. But the room held no power now. It was just a box, an asset, a line item on a budget sheet. It was neutralized. I stepped back into the hallway and pulled the heavy door closed. I watched the mechanism engage. The lock thudded shut, and the reader light flashed red, then went steady. Secure. But the meaning had inverted. The lock was no longer a boundary to protect the powerful from the weak. It was a shield to protect the vulnerable within. It was no longer a border. It was a promise. As I turned from the door, the elevator at the end of the hall dinged. The doors opened, and a man in a gray janitorial uniform stepped out, pushing a cart. He was one of the night shift crew, coming on early. Or perhaps the chaos had thrown off the entire building's rhythm. He saw me, and he froze. His eyes were tired, but they were sharp. He recognized me. He looked from my face to the door I had just closed, and then back to me. A flicker of understanding, of fear, of something new, passed across his face. He knew what this room was. He was one of the people who lived in the whispers. He said nothing. He just pushed his cart forward, but as he passed me, he kept his head down and muttered a single word, so low I almost didn't hear it. Thank you. It wasn't praise. It wasn't fawning. It was a receipt for a service rendered, a transaction completed. I didn't say, "You're welcome." This was not a gift. It was a debt that had been collected on behalf of all of them. I just nodded. Once, he continued down the hall, the squeak of his cartwheel the only sound. My phone, which I had silenced before the town hall, vibrated in my pocket. A high-priority notification had punched through. I pulled it out. It was an email from Marcus Thorne. The subject line was stark. Subject: Action by unanimous consent. effective immediately. The body was short. Ms. Vale, in light of the removal of the CEO and CPO, and in accordance with the emergency powers granted by your temporary oversight role, the board has voted unanimously to appoint you Acting Chief Controls Officer, CCO, for Northbridge Meridian, effective immediately. Your authority is absolute regarding all matters of compliance, ethics, security, and internal investigation until permanent replacements are ratified. CCO, not a monitor, a C-suite title. They had handed me the keys to their entire internal kingdom, desperately trying to prove to their contractors, their shareholders, and the federal government that they were handling it. They had put the bomb maker in charge of disarming the bomb. I slid the phone back into my pocket. I stood there for a moment in the silent, empty hall. My fingers brushed against the object in my other pocket, the small, heavy, obsolete brass key I had taken from the drawer inside that room, the key to nothing, a symbol of an old, broken lock. I closed my fist around it. The metal was cold and solid. I walked to the elevator and pressed the call button. The doors opened. A brightly lit box. I stepped inside. The doors slid closed, sealing me in, my reflection flashing across the polished steel. I pressed the button for the lobby. The elevator began its smooth, silent descent. I was done. Thank you so much for listening to this story. We're a new channel, and your support means everything. Let us know where you're listening from in the comments below. We'd love to connect and hear your thoughts. If you enjoyed this, please consider subscribing, liking the video, and if you really want to help us grow, smash that hype button so this story can be heard by more people.